Welcome to this explainer. Come a little closer for a second, because we're about to dive into one of the absolute most mind-bending historical mysteries you're ever going to come across. Look, we all know history is the bedrock we build our entire understanding of the world on, right? But it all totally depends on the records left behind by the people who came before us. So what if we found out that a massive, huge chunk of that rock-solid foundation was literally just made of thin air? Just imagine, if you will, that nearly 300 years of human history might just be a complete and utter fabrication. 3 centuries, completely gone, just vanished. Think about the sheer volume of human lives, of massive events, of totally world-changing progress that fits into 300 years. Now imagine someone looking you in the eye and telling you none of it actually happened. Honestly, it sounds totally absurd, doesn't it? But really, what if 300 years of history were completely made up? I want you to just suspend your disbelief for a minute or two as we look into this incredibly wild claim. We're going to break down the math, the historical record, and honestly, the psychology behind a theory that literally tries to rewrite the calendar, hanging right there on your wall. Okay, let's jump right in. Here's our roadmap for cracking this massive historical detective case. First up, the missing 3 centuries. Then, doing the calendar math, followed by erasing the father of Europe. After that, we'll do a global reality check, and finally, look at the fragility of truth. So what we're talking about here is the phantom time hypothesis. It's a theory suggesting that the period from 614 to 911 AD never actually happened. Just let that sink in for a second. The bold assertion here is that these specific centuries are a literal phantom era, just conjured up out of absolutely nowhere. Section 1, the missing 3 centuries. Let's actually map out exactly where this temporal black hole supposedly exists. We start way back in 45 BC. That's the inception of the Julian calendar. Fast forward, and right there in the middle, smack in the early Middle Ages, is our alleged phantom gap, stretching from 614 to 911 AD. And then we jump all the way to 1582 AD, which is when the Gregorian calendar was introduced. This specific 300-year chronological gap is where our entire mystery lives. But who actually found this gap in the first place? Well, that brings us to Section 2, doing the calendar math. To figure out how anyone could realistically claim 3 whole centuries are missing, we've got to look at the prime suspect in our historical mystery. It's a German historian from the 1990s named Heribert Illig. And to really grasp his audacious claim, we have to look closely at the transition between 2 very specific calendars. On one side, you have the old Julian calendar, which over time was drifting relative to the actual solar year. And on the other, you have the new Gregorian calendar. This was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, specifically to fix that exact drift. So, when Pope Gregory made this change, astronomers of the time noted a very real-world discrepancy. The old Julian calendar had drifted by exactly 10 days relative to the solar year. To fix it, well, they simply skipped 10 days in October of 1582. Done. It seemed like a super simple, straightforward fix to a really minor mathematical error, right? But here is where Illig drops his absolute bombshell. He sat down, did the math, and realized something super astonishing. If the Julian calendar had been accurately tracking time since it started in 45 BC, the gap by the year 1582 should have actually been 13 days, not 10. The math just straight up wasn't adding up. So Illig looked at that discrepancy, and he drew a massive, massive conclusion. He decided that this 3-day mathematical gap wasn't just some innocent miscalculation of leap years. Oh no. To him, it was hard evidence. He argued that these missing days meant a huge block of time had been artificially inserted right into the historical record. Basically, he posited that the early Middle Ages were a total fabrication, completely conjured up to artificially advance the timeline. This leads us directly to Section 3, erasing the father of Europe. Because think about it, if we actually accept Illig's premise that the years 614 to 911 never even happened, the historical collateral damage is just staggering. I mean, we would have to conclude that Charlemagne, the iconic king of the Franks, the guy we literally call the father of Europe, was a purely legendary figure, just a completely fictional character invented to give the 10th century this glorious mythical past. The entirety of the Carolingian dynasty, all their epic battles, their sweeping administrative reforms, the supposed massive revival of learning, all of it just transformed into a grand, sweeping work of fiction. No way, right? And it's not even just a written history that gets thrown out the window here. Proponents of this theory go after the archaeological record too. They point to what they call a paucity of evidence for the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. They argue that the buildings and the physical artifacts we usually attribute to this period are actually just misdated items that really belong to the older Roman or Romanesque eras. They honestly believe scholars simply filled this supposed gap with invented narratives, just to maintain the neat, continuous storyline of Western civilization. But hold on. Let's move to Section 4, the global reality check. Before you go throwing out your history books, let's bring the hammer down with the overwhelming, totally unified consensus of the actual historical community. So the crucial point here is that astronomers can easily explain that calendar discrepancy. It comes down to well-documented errors in exactly how the Julian leap year system was implemented early on. But even more importantly, independent evidence from outside Europe just completely shatters this entire theory. Look, while Europe was supposedly busy faking its history, the Islamic world was keeping meticulous, rock-solid records of its rapid expansion during this exact same period. And over in China, the Tang dynasty provides a rigorous, highly detailed, and completely independent timeline that perfectly aligns with the exact centuries Illig claims never even occurred. And beyond just the hard evidence, the sheer logic of this conspiracy totally falls apart the second you poke it. To successfully invent 300 years of history, these supposed conspirators would have had to manipulate records across Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and the Far East all at once. The logistics of a lie that big are just functionally impossible. Seriously, it's hard enough getting a group chat to agree on dinner plans today. Just imagine trying to secretly coordinate a 300-year historical fabrication across multiple continents using nothing but horseback riders and carrier pigeons. It's for sure not going to happen. Which brings us to our final section, the fragility of truth. So you've got to wonder, why does a theory that's so easily disproven continue to capture people's imaginations? Well, as one quote puts it, it speaks to our deep-seated anxiety about the fragility of truth. The idea that our past could be a mirage is a seductive one. And that hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? We live in an age where our historical narrative is constantly being interrogated and picked apart. Even though Illig's hypothesis is totally historically unfounded, it persists because it challenges us. It forces us to stop taking things for granted and to critically examine exactly how we know what we know about our own past. Ultimately, this whole theory serves as a really fascinating lens into our own human obsession with timelines and legacies. You see, history isn't just a cold, dusty collection of immutable facts. It is a fragile, human-constructed story. Whether Charlemagne was a living, breathing guy or just a total myth, the fact that we are still talking about him, still questioning the very fabric of the time he allegedly occupied, well, it proves that our historical narrative is the most powerful tool we possess for understanding who we are today. Which leaves us with one final, kind of provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. If history is indeed a human-constructed story, incredibly complex and entirely reliant on the flawed humans who recorded it, what else are we misremembering?